I never expected that accepting leftovers would change my entire life, but that's exactly what happened when I started working at the Copper Pot, a small restaurant tucked between a laundromat and a used bookstore on the east side of town. I was 26, broke, and working as a waiter to pay off student loans while I figured out what I actually wanted to do with my English degree. The job was fine, nothing special. The tips were decent enough, the manager was mostly absent, and the clientele consisted of neighborhood regulars who knew exactly what they wanted before they even sat down. It was predictable, which was exactly what I needed after a string of failed attempts at finding my purpose. Then, Marcus started in the kitchen. I remember the first time I saw him. It was a Tuesday evening, right in the middle of the dinner rush. I'd just gotten screamed at by a woman who insisted her medium-rare steak was too pink, even though medium rare is literally defined by being pink, and I pushed through the kitchen doors with the plate, ready to ask whoever was on the grill to char it into oblivion. That's when I saw him. Tall, maybe 6'2", with deep brown skin and these incredibly focused eyes. He was wearing the standard kitchen whites, but somehow he made them look intentional, like he'd chosen them. His forearms were covered in old burn scars, the kind you get from years of working over open flames, and he moved around the kitchen with this quiet confidence that made everyone else seem frantic by comparison. He looked up when I came in, and for just a second, our eyes met. He had this way of looking at you like he was really seeing you, not just glancing in your direction. It made my stomach do this weird flip that I immediately tried to ignore. "Problem with the steak?" he asked. His voice was low and warm, like honey. "Customer wants it more done," I said, holding out the plate. He took it from me without judgment, without the dramatic sighs that Carlos, our usual cook, always gave. He just nodded, set it back on the grill, and said, "Give me 3 minutes." I stood there for a second longer than necessary, then pushed back through to the dining room, my heart beating slightly faster than it should have been. Over the next few weeks, I learned that Marcus had moved to town from Atlanta. He'd worked in some high-end restaurants down there, the kind with Michelin stars and celebrity chefs, but he'd burned out on the intensity and moved here for a slower pace. He was 32, 6 years older than me, and he had this calm presence that made the chaos of dinner service feel manageable. We didn't talk much at first, just the necessary communication between front of house and kitchen. An order here, a question about a modification there. But I found myself noticing things about him. The way he tasted everything before it went out, making tiny adjustments that probably no one but him could detect. The way he kept his station immaculately organized even in the middle of a rush. The way he hummed while he cooked, too quietly for most people to hear, but I caught it sometimes when I was waiting for an order. And then there were the leftovers. It started about a month after he'd begun working there. I was closing one night, counting my tips in the wait station, when Marcus came out of the kitchen carrying a container. "Hey," he said, and I looked up. "You like salmon?" Yeah, I said, confused. "Made too much for the special tonight. Thought you might want it." He held out the container. Through the clear plastic, I could see a perfect piece of cedar plank salmon with roasted vegetables and wild rice. "Oh, you don't have to. It's just going to go to waste otherwise," he said with a slight shrug. "Unless you don't want it." "No, I do, thank you. That's really nice of you." He gave me this small smile, just a slight curve of his lips, and headed back to finish closing the kitchen. I took that salmon home and ate it sitting on my apartment floor, because my table was covered in unfolded laundry and unopened mail. It was the best thing I'd eaten in months, maybe years. Every bite was perfectly seasoned, the fish flaking apart tenderly, the vegetables still having a slight crunch. It tasted like someone had actually cared about the food they were making, which sounds obvious for a cook, but there's a difference between cooking and caring. The next week, it happened again. This time it was pasta, a carbonara with pancetta and fresh peas that made me actually moan out loud in my empty apartment. The week after that, a Thai curry that had so many layers of flavor I couldn't identify them all. It became a pattern. Every week, sometimes twice a week, Marcus would emerge from the kitchen at the end of the night with a container of food. He always had a reason, made too much, testing a new recipe, trying to use up ingredients before they went bad. But the thing was, I started to notice that no one else was getting these leftovers, just me. I didn't let myself think too hard about what that might mean. By the third month of working together, we'd started actually talking. Real conversations, not just kitchen logistics. I learned that he'd grown up in a big family, the middle of 5 kids, and that he'd learned to cook from his grandmother who'd raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. I learned that he read poetry, which surprised me, and that his favorite poet was Yusuf Komunya Ka. I learned that he'd been married once, to a woman, back in his early 20s, but it had fallen apart after 2 years when he finally admitted to himself what he'd been hiding his whole life. I thought I could make it work, he told me one quiet Tuesday night when we were the last 2 in the restaurant. Thought if I just tried hard enough, wanted it enough, I could be the person everyone expected me to be. We were sitting at the bar, both of us with a beer, his cooking shift done and my serving shift over. The lights were dimmed, and the restaurant had that peaceful emptiness that comes after a busy night. "What changed?" I asked. "I realized I was living someone else's life," he said, looking down at his beer bottle, "and that every day I kept doing it, I was dying a little bit more inside." I didn't say anything. I couldn't, because I knew exactly what he meant. I'd never been married, never even had a serious relationship, but I'd spent my entire life living in that same space between who I was and who I thought I should be. I'd had girlfriends in college, relationships that felt like I was following a script someone else had written. I'd told myself I was bisexual, that my attraction to men was just one part of a larger spectrum, but the truth was, I'd never felt with any woman what I'd felt in those brief moments of eye contact with men in the charged silence of possibility. "That must have taken a lot of courage," I finally said. Marcus looked up at me then, and there was something in his eyes that made my breath catch. "Some things are worth being brave for," he said quietly. I went home that night with another container of food, this time a perfectly cooked ribeye with garlic mashed potatoes and broccolini, but I barely tasted it. I kept thinking about the way Marcus had looked at me, the weight of his words, the feeling that we'd been talking about something much bigger than his past. Things shifted after that night. The air between us felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. When I'd push through the kitchen doors, I'd find him looking at me, and he'd hold my gaze for just a beat too long before turning back to his work. When he'd hand me the containers of food, our fingers would brush, and neither of us would pull away as quickly as we could have. I started finding excuses to be in the kitchen, checking on orders that didn't need checking, asking questions about dishes I already understood, and Marcus, I noticed, started coming out to the dining room more, wiping down the bar after the last customers left, reorganizing menus that didn't need reorganizing, always ending up near wherever I was. We were circling each other, both of us afraid to make the first move, both of us terrified of misreading the situation and ruining this thing that had become so important to both of us. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, and we'd been slammed all evening. One of the other waiters had called in sick, so I'd been running the entire dining room basically by myself. By the time we closed, I was exhausted, my feet aching, my shirt stained with someone's spilled wine. I'd made good tips, but I'd earned every dollar. Marcus was still in the kitchen when I finished cashing out. I could hear him moving around, the clang of pans being washed, the rush of water. I should have just gone home, but I found myself pushing through the doors. He looked up when I came in, surprised. His chef's coat was unbuttoned at the top, and there was a smudge of something dark on his cheek. He looked tired but satisfied, the way he always did after a good service. "Hey," he said. "Rough night?" "You could say that," I replied, leaning against the prep counter, "but we made it through." "You did great out there. I could hear how busy it was." "Thanks." I watched him finish washing the last pan, his movements efficient and practiced. "You don't have to do that yourself. That's why we have dishwashers." "I like doing my own pans," he said. "Helps me wind down." He dried his hands and turned to face me fully. We were alone in the kitchen, the restaurant dark beyond the doors, and suddenly the space between us felt very small. "I made you something," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Not leftovers this time. Something I actually made for you." He went to the walk-in and came back with a container. When he opened it, I saw a beautiful piece of chocolate cake with what looked like homemade raspberry sauce. "You made me a dessert?" I asked, something warm spreading through my chest. "It's a molten chocolate cake," he said. "Your favorite, right?" I've heard you tell customers it's the best thing on the menu. You remembered that? I remember a lot of things about you, David. The way he said my name made something shift inside me. We'd been dancing around this for months, both of us too scared to acknowledge what was happening. But suddenly, I was tired of being scared. I was tired of living in that space between who I was and who I pretended to be. Marcus, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. Why do you keep giving me food? He set the container down on the counter between us. I think you know why. I want to hear you say it. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him making the same decision I was making, choosing courage over fear. Because feeding someone is how I show I care. And I care about you. A lot. More than I probably should, given that we work together and I'm not even sure if you... He trailed off. If I what? If you feel the same way, if you even like men. If I've been reading this whole thing completely wrong and I'm about to make the biggest fool of myself. I pushed off from the counter and closed the distance between us. We were standing so close now that I could smell his cologne mixed with kitchen smells, garlic and smoke and something earthy. You're not reading it wrong, I said. I've been waiting for months for you to make a move because I was too terrified to make one myself. Terrified of what? Of this being real. Of having to finally admit what I've been hiding from my whole life. Of wanting something this much and having it not work out. Marcus reached up and brushed a strand of hair off my forehead, his fingers gentle. And now? Now I'm still terrified, I admitted, but I'm more scared of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what if. He smiled, a real smile this time, not the small careful ones he usually gave. That's good, he said, because I'm about to kiss you, and I'd hate to do it if you were going to run away after. I'm not going anywhere, I whispered. When his lips met mine, it felt like everything in my life suddenly clicked into place, like I'd been trying to force puzzle pieces together my whole life and finally found the piece that fit. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek, and I leaned into him, my hands gripping his chef's coat. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of us still half afraid this wasn't real. But then it deepened, and I felt something break open inside me, some wall I'd been building since I was old enough to understand that what I felt wasn't what I was supposed to feel. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against mine. I've wanted to do that since the first day I saw you, he said. The day with the steak. You looked so annoyed and so beautiful, and I thought, this is going to be trouble. I laughed, and it felt good, felt free. Was I? Trouble? The best kind, he said, and kissed me again. We stayed in that kitchen for another hour, talking and kissing and eating the chocolate cake he'd made, which was incredible, though I barely tasted it. We talked about what this meant, about keeping it quiet at work for now, about taking things slow, but also acknowledging that this felt big, important, like something worth protecting. When I finally left that night, I didn't have a container of leftovers. I had something better. I had the feeling of Marcus's lips on mine, the memory of his hands in my hair, the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. The next few months were a revelation. We kept things professional at work, though sometimes I'd catch him watching me from the kitchen and have to hide my smile. But after hours, we were inseparable. He'd cook for me in his apartment, these elaborate meals that he'd plan all day, and I'd sit at his counter with a glass of wine, watching him work and feeling more at home than I'd ever felt anywhere. He taught me to cook, patiently showing me how to properly dice an onion, how to know when a pan is hot enough, how to taste as you go and trust your instincts. And through cooking, he taught me other things too. How to be present in my body, how to trust myself, how to stop apologizing for taking up space. I came out to my family on a Sunday afternoon video call, my hands shaking but my voice steady. I told them about Marcus, about how happy I was, about how I'd finally figured out who I was supposed to be. My mom cried, but they were good tears. My dad was quiet, processing, but he called me later that night and said he loved me and just wanted me to be happy. Marcus was there through all of it, solid and steady, holding me when I needed to be held and giving me space when I needed to process. He never pushed, never demanded, just loved me with the same care and attention he brought to everything he did. 6 months after that first kiss in the kitchen, Marcus got offered a job as head chef at a new restaurant opening downtown. It was a huge opportunity, the kind of thing he'd moved here hoping to find. But it meant leaving the Copper Pot, meant we wouldn't be working together anymore. "Is that going to be weird?" he asked me the night he got the offer. We were lying in his bed, my head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my shoulder. "Weird how?" "Not seeing you every day at work. That's where this started." I propped myself up to look at him. "Marcus, I don't care where we work. I care about this, about us, about coming home to you or you coming home to me and having our whole lives ahead of us instead of just stolen moments after closing." He pulled me down and kissed me, soft and sweet. "Move in with me," he said when we broke apart. "What?" "Move in with me. Your lease is up next month anyway, right? And you're here most nights already. Let's make it official. Let's build a life together." I felt tears prick my eyes, good tears, happy tears. "Yes," I said. "Yes. Absolutely yes." So I moved into his apartment, and it became our apartment. My books filled his shelves. My clothes hung next to his in the closet. We adopted a cat from the shelter, a grumpy orange tabby that Marcus named Paprika, and who slept between us every night. Marcus thrived at the new restaurant. I'd go visit him sometimes during prep, sitting at the bar and watching him command his kitchen with quiet authority. He was in his element, creating beautiful food and leading his team with the same patience and care he showed me. I eventually left the Copper Pot too, got a job at a bookstore that paid less but made me happier. I started writing again, something I'd abandoned after college, and Marcus would read my drafts and tell me honestly what worked and what didn't. We built a life together, one day at a time, one meal at a time. And every so often, when Marcus made something special, he'd pack up the leftovers in a container and send them with me to work. A little reminder of where we started, of how sometimes the best things in life come from saying yes to something as simple as accepting food from someone who cares. Because that's what the leftovers were always about. Not the food itself, though the food was incredible. It was about someone seeing me, really seeing me, and wanting to nourish me in every way possible. It was about love in its most basic form, the desire to feed and care for another person. Looking back now, I can see how lost I was before Marcus, how I was just going through the motions, waiting for my life to start, not realizing that it couldn't start until I was brave enough to be myself. And he gave me that, not directly, not by fixing me or completing me, but by showing me what it looked like to live authentically, to choose courage over fear, to believe that you're worth being loved exactly as you are. These days, Marcus still sends me home with leftovers sometimes, but now it's from our kitchen, food we've made together, and I'm not going home because I already am home, wherever he is. That's what I learned from the cook who sent me home with leftovers every night, that sometimes the most profound love stories start with the smallest gestures, that being seen is the greatest gift we can give each other, and that the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be fed in all the ways that matter.